When you think of vampires, you probably picture old European castles and Count Dracula, but what if I told you that America has its own chilling vampire history, one that's stranger than fiction? In the late 1800s, rural New England was gripped by a real-life vampire panic, rooted in fear and desperation. Families in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont faced a mysterious, deadly disease, consumption, now known as tuberculosis. Desperate for answers, they turned to old folk beliefs and did something shocking. They dug up their own relatives' graves, searching for signs of vampirism. They believed the dead were somehow draining the life from the living, and that stopping them could save the rest of the family. This wasn't about monsters or magic, but about families trying to save each other from a relentless illness that seemed to pass from one loved one to the next. With no help from doctors, who were often baffled by the disease, people clung to the only explanations they had, passed down through generations. The result was a uniquely American vampire panic, with headlines and rumors spreading from town to town. The vampire was often a beloved mother, brother, or child, thought to be feeding on their family from beyond the grave. In Exeter, Rhode Island, the case of Mercy Brown became infamous. Her body was exhumed, her heart removed and burned, in a desperate attempt to save her brother. These actions weren't born from hate, but from desperation and love. Families mourned as they performed these rituals, hoping to break the cycle of death. Letters and diaries from the time described the fear that swept through small towns, and the rituals, like burning organs or reburying bodies with protective symbols, meant to stop the spread. We'll explore the disease behind the panic, what people believed, and how these beliefs were recorded in local newspapers and family journals, and the rituals they performed, sometimes in secret, sometimes with the whole community watching, became part of local legend. Eventually, science brought answers. As doctors learned more about tuberculosis, the vampire panic faded, but the stories remained. The New England vampire panic is a story of crisis, community, and the search for hope in the face of the unknown. It's a reminder of how people react when science has no answers, and how folklore can fill the void. Their actions, though shocking now, were attempts to regain control in a terrifying time, like the family of Edwin Brown, who watched helplessly as one by one, their loved ones fell ill. Let's uncover the real story behind America's hidden vampire legend and the families who lived through it, and discover how knowledge and compassion finally put these fears to rest. Life in 19th-century New England was harsh and uncertain, with families living in close quarters, often several generations under one roof. Then, the Great White Plague, tuberculosis or consumption, swept through the region, leaving devastation in its wake. The disease wasted people away, turning them pale and thin, racked with coughing fits and blood, dying slowly over months or even years. Consumption became the leading cause of death, and its relentless spread filled entire communities with dread and sorrow. Families were devastated as one member after another fell ill, often resulting in rows of gravestones bearing the same surname. No one understood how the disease spread, and doctors were powerless to stop it. Medical advice was limited to rest and fresh air, but these remedies rarely helped, and hope faded with each new case. Helplessness and fear grew as families watched loved ones waste away, powerless to intervene. Desperate for answers, people turned to folklore and superstition to explain the suffering. Some families lost nearly everyone, while others were mysteriously spared, deepening the sense of fear and confusion. The slow, relentless nature of the illness made it seem as if something was draining the very life from the healthy. Without knowledge of germs, the repeating pattern of death looked supernatural, almost like a curse. It seemed as if the first to die was somehow pulling the living into the grave, haunting the family from beyond. This fear and confusion gave birth to the New England vampire legend as people searched for a supernatural explanation. The disease thrived in crowded homes, infecting others in close proximity and fueling the belief that something evil was at work. TB bacteria spread invisibly through the air, but to those suffering it felt like a mysterious invisible enemy was stalking them. The idea that a dead relative could be causing the illness took hold, leading to exhumations and strange rituals. Panic spread as communities tried to protect themselves from what they believed were vampires preying on the living. In their desperation, people turned to old superstitions and rituals, hoping to break the curse and save their families. The legend of the New England vampire grew from the shadows of this deadly, misunderstood plague, forever linking the Great White Plague to tales of the supernatural. The New England vampire wasn't the only monster haunting people's imaginations in the 19th century. Alongside the vampire, who was really a recently deceased family member believed to drain life from the living, there were tales of witches, ghosts, and even werewolves. These beliefs were desperate attempts to explain why disease, misfortune, or strange happenings spread through families and communities. People thought the dead could be envious or lonely, feeding on their loved ones' vitality, while ghosts and witches were blamed for unexplained deaths or bad luck. The vampire was often a son, wife, or father, never a stranger, but witches could be neighbors and ghosts might be anyone who died with unfinished business. These ideas came from European folklore, but were adapted to fit the crises of tuberculosis, mysterious illnesses, and the unknown. The rituals weren't just about killing monsters, but about protecting the family from all kinds of supernatural threats. Communities saw these acts as spiritual medicine, not violence, ways to fight back against invisible forces. They were fighting disease and misfortune with the only tools and stories they understood, whether the threat was a vampire, a witch, or a ghost. When a family suspected a vampire was responsible for mysterious illness or death, they resorted to a drastic and deeply symbolic act: exhumation of the suspected corpse. The entire community would gather at the cemetery, often in the early morning, with a local doctor or minister present to lend authority and legitimacy to the proceedings. Men would dig up the grave of the suspected vampire, sometimes in freezing conditions, while the crowd watched in tense anticipation. The body was carefully examined for signs considered unnatural, such as fresh blood in the heart, a lack of decomposition, or even hair and nail growth, which were misunderstood natural processes. If the corpse appeared suspiciously well preserved, the heart, and sometimes other vital organs were removed. This was believed to be the source of the vampire's power. The extracted organs were burned, and in some cases, the ashes were mixed with water to create a bitter tonic, which was then given to the sick in hopes of breaking the vampire's hold. Though these rituals seem gruesome today, they were seen as a form of folk medicine, an act of hope and communal healing in the face of relentless disease. The ritual was meant to sever the supernatural link believed to exist between the dead and the living, which was thought to be draining the life from the community. The process was public, solemn, and often emotional, with entire towns participating in the hope of saving their loved ones. Communities believed that by performing these rituals, they could halt the spread of illness and restore health to the afflicted. For grieving families, exhumation was a final, desperate attempt to end the suffering and protect the living from further loss. The ritual of exhumation became the dramatic centerpiece of the American vampire panic, symbolizing both the fear and the resilience of 19th century communities in the face of the unknown. When opening a grave, townspeople weren't looking for monsters. They searched for bodies that hadn't decayed as expected, especially those with little to no decomposition, or with a face that looked unusually lifelike. A fresh-looking corpse, or liquid blood in the heart, or around the mouth, was seen as proof of vampirism. They also checked for blood at the mouth or nose, and sometimes even cut open the chest to see if the heart was full of blood. Even natural changes, like hair or nails seeming to grow or the body appearing to move in the grave, were misread as signs. Any unusual detail, like a bloated abdomen, a reddish tint to the skin, or blood-stained shrouds, became evidence of a vampire. Without scientific knowledge, normal decomposition, like gas buildup or skin slippage, looked like a threat. Fear turned natural processes into proof of the undead. The most famous American vampire case is Mercy Brown's story in Exeter, Rhode Island, 1892. The Brown family, like many in rural New England, was devastated by tuberculosis, then called consumption, a mysterious and deadly disease that swept through families, often one member after another. Mercy's mother, Mary Eliza, and her older sister, Mary Olive, both died of the illness, leaving the family and community desperate for answers. When Mercy herself fell ill and died at just 19, her brother Edwin, who had moved away, returned home only to become sick as well. The townspeople, gripped by fear and superstition, began to suspect that one of the recently deceased Browns was somehow draining the life from Edwin. At the urging of neighbors, George Brown, the family patriarch, reluctantly agreed to exhume the bodies of his wife and daughters in the cold March of 1892. The mother and older sister's bodies had decomposed, but Mercy's was found remarkably well preserved. She had died only 2 months earlier, and the winter cold had kept her body from decaying. Blood was discovered in Mercy's heart and liver, which, to the frightened villagers, was undeniable proof that she was a vampire preying on her brother. Despite the presence of a local doctor who explained that the preservation was due to the cold and not supernatural forces, the community's fear overpowered scientific reasoning. Following old folk rituals, Mercy's heart and liver were removed, burned on a nearby stone, and the ashes mixed into a tonic for Edwin to drink, an act believed to break the vampire's curse and save him. Tragically, the ritual failed. Edwin died a few months later, and the Brown family's suffering continued. The Mercy Brown case made national headlines, drawing attention from newspapers across the country, and even inspiring later vampire fiction. It became the last major vampire panic in America, symbolizing the clash between folklore and emerging medical science. Mercy Brown's story is a powerful example of how fear, grief, and superstition could override logic and compassion even in the face of tragedy. It stands as a haunting reminder of a community's desperate hope for a cure, and the end of an era when old beliefs still held sway over the American imagination. Belief in vampires wasn't just foolish superstition, it was a response to overwhelming fear, confusion, and the desperate need for answers in a world full of uncertainty. Without understanding germs or the true causes of disease, people turned to the explanations they could imagine. When illness struck, it seemed to move from one family member to another, as if something unseen was preying on them. The vampire theory made sense in this context. One person would die, and then, mysteriously, others would fall ill and follow. It felt like a curse, or a supernatural force was at work. Desperation led communities to perform rituals, exhuming bodies, burning organs, or even feeding ashes to the sick, in hopes of breaking the cycle. These acts, though grim, gave people a sense of control over the unknown. Many of these rituals and beliefs were carried over from European folk traditions, which provided a ready-made script for dealing with crisis and loss. Immigrants brought stories and customs that shaped how communities responded to tragedy. The symptoms of consumption, now known as tuberculosis, were especially haunting. Victims grew pale, weak, and coughed up blood, matching the descriptions of vampire attacks in old legends. The slow, relentless nature of the illness made it feel like a supernatural force was draining the life from its victims, one by one. In the absence of scientific answers, people turned to old stories and folklore for comfort and explanation. These tales helped them make sense of suffering and loss. Gossip and rumor spread quickly in small communities, reinforcing the belief that something supernatural was to blame. Fear and uncertainty were contagious, just like the diseases themselves. In the absence of knowledge, fear filled the void. The belief in vampires was a way for people to cope with the unknown, to find meaning in tragedy, and to try to protect their loved ones from forces they couldn't understand. The vampire panic ended not with a change in belief, but with a revolution in science. As researchers began to study disease more closely, they uncovered the real causes behind the mysterious deaths. Scientists like Pasteur and Koch proved the germ theory of disease, showing that invisible microbes, not supernatural forces, were responsible for illness. In 1882, Koch identified the bacterium causing tuberculosis, and researchers learned to distinguish between natural decomposition and signs of disease. Medical studies explained how bodies could appear fresh after death due to cold weather or natural processes, debunking the myth of the undead. Doctors realized TB spread through the air, not from the grave, and that coughing and close contact, not vampires, were to blame. Public health measures, like isolation, hand washing, and improved sanitation, replaced exhumations and rituals. Sanatoriums offered real hope, and TB rates began to fall as science-based treatments took hold. Science provided answers that worked, making old rituals obsolete and giving communities new tools to fight disease. The vampire theory faded as knowledge grew, and scientific discoveries replaced superstition. Communities traded fear and folklore for evidence-based medicine and scientific understanding. The era of the New England vampire quietly ended as science dispelled the darkness of myth. Science had finally conquered the shadows of fear, illuminating the truth behind the legends. The American vampire panic is more than a scary story. It's a lesson in how people face the unknown. In the grip of a deadly disease, communities used the tools they had, driven by love and desperation. Their rituals were attempts at healing, not malice. When science offered real answers, old beliefs faded quickly. The shift from superstition to knowledge changed everything. Even today, fear and misinformation can spread in times of crisis. The vampire panic reminds us that people seek answers, even in the dark. It's a story of progress, from fear to understanding. The people of New England weren't ignorant, they were searching for hope. Their story honors the struggle to find light in the face of overwhelming fear. The end of the vampire era marked a significant turning point in American history. It symbolized the transition from superstition to scientific reasoning, paving the way for modern medicine. This period of fear and uncertainty ultimately led to a more informed and resilient society. The legacy of the vampire panic is a testament to human perseverance and the relentless pursuit of knowledge.